Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
I've actually got so many texts and comments and everything, and
it's been
those two big stories. They were just massive stories, internationally.
Yeah.
For Crime World, Conor McGregor, obviously, such an international star. Clodagh reporting from the trial, and then some of the things that happened in the aftermath have just been quite fascinating to watch, quite amazing to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Conor McGregor thing really struck a chord with a lot of women. I mean, in personally, I could say that absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jerry Hutch interview is a very different thing, and it struck all sorts of chords.
It did.
Which was great.
Yeah.
In terms of
huge amount of feedback on it.
And
I'd say 90%, 99% of it is positive, actually.
I don't know what 99% you're talking to. No, but yes, the funny thing about the Jerry Hutch reaction is there's such a wide variety of reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's been really interesting. So
now the next guy we're going to talk about.
Can you not segue into say another man of Jerry Hutch's vintage?
No, absolutely not. No. I'm going to segue in by questioning, wondering, sort of posing this sort of question that we probably won't be able to answer is, how many hours of police time do you think Christy Keane has cost this state at this stage? What age is this man?
Well, he's 63.
He's 63 and he's been arrested because of a €560,000 cocaine seizure in Limerick. We have been talking about him since the dawn of day, practically.
Yeah. I mean, veteran criminal is an overused term, isn't it?
63 years of age. So when do you get your bus pass?
You get your 66, isn't it?
So 3 years. Will he stop then, do you think?
Well, well, look, who knows? He might say, I haven't been charged with anything yet, and he'd be 100% correct. However, he has been picked up in connection with a major cocaine seizure in Limerick. There was 2 seizures that the Gardai are saying are linked. A total of 560,000 euros worth of cocaine, which is a major seizure. Initially, a man was stopped, 490,000 pounds or 1,000 euros worth of cocaine was seized, and then during a separate search under warrant, another 70,000 was
in the city.
So always when they say 70,000, I mean that is
street value. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it tends to be a kilo of cocaine.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about. A kilo, the guards give it a value of 70,000 or sometimes 60,000. So. But Christy Keane is picked up during this raid. I mean, Christy Keane, as you said, his criminality stretches back so far, and his notoriety has, of course, become so prominent, largely because of the role he was said to have played in the feud in Limerick, which was really, if you look back on it now, I mean, there was a shocking level of violence in a relatively medium-sized city. A huge number of people lost their lives between, again, like all of these feuds, it's sometimes that exact number is hard to say, but you're talking between 18 or 19 people.
Christy's brother Kieran, of course, was killed in 2003.
Yes.
In a double cross that was cooked up by the Dundon McCarthy mob.
Yeah, and of course, Desi Dundon remains in prison, serving life for that murder. But I suppose even before the feud began, Christy Keane was known for his links to criminality. Obviously, the drugs business started to kick off in Limerick, like it did around most parts of Ireland, sometime in the mid to early 90s. And Christy Keane was one of the first people whose associates really capitalised on that. Christy Keane was a coalman, and it was always suspected that as part of his delivering coal, he was delivering other stuff as well.
The old delivery ruse is cunning, isn't it?
It is, and of course there had been criminality had been a feature in Limerick, like in all cities, but it was genuine. mostly focused on a couple of areas.
So he was in jail, was he, when his brother was killed? So the brother was killed in 2003. I think he was convicted for sentenced to 10 years in 2000.
Yes.
He was caught with nearly €250,000 worth of cocaine.
Well, I think it was cannabis actually. So he was caught carrying it himself in a bag.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the guards at least had believed that he was up to greater things, but he was said at the time to have been a bit of a control freak. But what really happened, I suppose, that shot the Limerick gangland problem into national headlines was a feud that had broken out, and we always think of it now or reference it now as the Keane Collopys versus the Dundon McCarthys, but at least initially it was the Keanes against the Ryans. Eddie Ryan had been a sort of close pal of Christy Keane. Eddie Ryan was kind of very much a local kind of hard man, very much a sort of feared figure in Limerick. There had been this dispute had broken up between them. Christy Keane had some sort of bitter falling out, and in November 2000 there was an attempt on Keane's life. He narrowly escaped with his life, and a number of days later, Eddie Ryan was shot dead in the Moose Bar. And that really kicked off.
Which is still there.
Which is still there.
Corner, yeah.
Obviously, Eddie Ryan was kind of had a base in the Moyross area, and it became this kind of geographical, I suppose, dispute as well between sort of people based in the island field.
Small compact city, especially the city centre, where of course they would often meet and pass one another by. But it was actually, I think, what really kicked it off was when the Dundon brothers came back from the UK, because Wayne Dundon had actually been deported, basically, by the Home Office, because he was so violent. He had been caught up in a number of number of crimes, including he had savagely assaulted a pensioner in a wheelchair and various other things, and they sent him back. And his cousins, the McCarthys, at that point were really looking for backup.
Yeah.
So it was the McCarthy, Ryan, Dundons, essentially.
Yes, and it's even more complicated than that, because there's a couple of branches of McCarthy's that are, while they are related, aren't so directly related. So it became very complicated. But of course, Eddie Ryan's sons, a couple of his sons would also be abducted, Kieran Rashers Ryan and Eddie Ryan Jr. So that was the ruse, was it not? That was the ruse, yeah.
They weren't really abducted, it was suspected.
No. So that was the double cross then. And ultimately, Kieran Keane had gone to meet with members of the Dundon McCarthy gang. He was accompanied by Owen Tracy Sr., who would have been a nephew of Christy Keane's. Kieran Keane was ultimately brutally murdered, and Owen Tracy was stabbed multiple times and left for dead, and amazingly made a recovery.
And gave evidence.
And that
was the start of really Limerick has always been torn apart by essentially, state witnesses. From within the gangs.
Now, I mean, Owen Tracy never was under any protection, or I'm sure he was under protection.
He gave evidence. I think 5 people were convicted.
He was, very, including Desi Dundon, and including other members of the gang. And
you would have thought, would you not, after that would be the end of it? So many of them convicted for life and murder, but yet it continued and it went on and on and on, and it became ever more violent, that feud.
It did, and familial relationships played a very much a part in it, because of the kind of tight-knit nature of some of the family units down there, I suppose. But a couple of things happened. When Christy Keane was serving his sentence in Portlaoise, he struck up very close ties with a number of criminals. I think he had been associated with the Gilligan gang. Maybe being supplied with them was always the suggestion. But he sort of struck up links with Brian Rattigan behind bars. And of course, the Dundon McCarthy faction, they became very close to really the Kinnihan cartel figures.
Shows the ambition of them, doesn't it? That was the first time that they were kind of reaching across the state to kind of join for common purpose, which was drug dealing, weapons sourcing, and criminality in general.
Yeah, and I mean the Dundon faction had particularly close associations with people like Paddy Doyle, who was ultimately killed in Spain. I mean, Paddy Doyle would have gone down and lived there. Graham Whelan was also spotted meeting with members of them. Graham Whelan, better known as the Whig.
Ross Browning had houses during the Criminal Assets Bureau case. It came up that there was houses that were in his name on Hyde Road that had sort of been paid as currency, probably for drugs, it was suspected.
Yeah, so I mean, those ties led to access to weapons. It led to access to expertise, and it certainly led to an escalation of it. The Dundon brothers, John and Wayne in particular, were living in Hyde Road, and they really terrorised their own community as well as their rivals, and
their violence did for them. Christy Keane has been a much more of a survivor, much more of a businessman than a lot of those that he has seen go to jail for life, basically because of their violent tendencies. But he has sort of gone on and developed as a criminal into something way more sophisticated than the guy he was when he was delivering coal and transporting cannabis on a coal lorry.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, he's stayed largely away from Garda attention, certainly. I mean, his allies, the Colopy faction, and most of them ended up in prison, but the Keanes seemed to become more sophisticated. The Keane gang were certainly suspected of being involved in a number of money laundering operations that were certainly of a higher level than what we had seen with the Dundon McCarthys, who were some of them were more likely to bury their money if they even held on to it past the weekend. Christy Keane, of course, narrowly escaped with his own life when he was shot in 2015. He was in University of Limerick attending a gym session, and there was a very serious attempt on his life. A number of people are currently serving sentences for that. Larry McCarthy, a key member of the Dundon McCarthy gang, was ultimately convicted for his role in supplying a getaway car. I think he got a 6.5-year sentence. So Christy Keane has still been a target throughout all that time.
Is he still living in Limerick?
He's still living in his family home, the home that he stayed in for the last couple of decades. It's a nice home. There's a lot of his associates are probably become more serious players, but Keane has been described as a patriarchal figure. His own sister recently was at the centre of a Criminal Assets Bureau and a criminal trial, Sandra Hare, in connection with money, that unexplained money, I suppose.
It's unusual for somebody as senior, as patriarchal as Christy Keane to find themselves arrested in connection with raids that net, seizures of cocaine.
It is, but if you go back into I think he was caught in 2000 and he was ultimately convicted at a later point. But yeah, he had the big bag of cannabis in a sack, I think, in his bag. So although Limerick, there's huge money to be made and these are very sophisticated operations, they still are slightly of a smaller scale and still have to rely maybe on the sort of key network of themselves and people.
Isn't it amazing though? It's the same names. Like we hear there's a lot of Garda activity in Limerick. There's a lot of arrests have been made. There's people back, and we hear quite a lot from it. They're all the same.
Yeah.
People as the first time round. They've just washed around and come back a little bit older, a little bit wiser.
Well, you could say the same for Dublin, I suppose, if you think back to it. If you think back to if you look at the Martin Cahill gang, I mean, how many people of that gang, how many relatives did that spread out to? Many, not least including people like Jaws Byrne and
But they're finite, the amount of criminals in their 60s still actively are suspected
100%.
of being actively involved in. I mean, to be lifted and to be quizzed in connection with this cocaine seizure is unusual, to say the least.
Oh, it is.
For a 63-year-old.
It is, and it can't be a pleasant thought.
When is he thinking of retirement?
Well, I mean, I suppose.
What does that look like?
What does that look like? I suppose it's when you're a patriarchal figure, do you get to retire? Or does one remain a patriarch forever?
Well, one probably remains a target forever, as Eamon Kelly proved when he was shot dead. I think he had picked up his bus pass and his state pension. He was 66, was he?
Yeah.
He is the oldest I can recall criminal figure that was assassinated. And that was outside his home in Furry Park in Colester when 2012, 13.
So following the murder of Alan Ryan anyway.
Well, look, I've no doubt we'll be talking about Christy Keane again, and we'll return maybe on a bigger scale to Limerick and have a look at what exactly is going on there from an investigative point of view. So thank you, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.